Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, what's the collective term for First Ministers? Answers on a postcard, please, because 3 of them and a Deputy First Minister went into Downing Street about an hour ago to talk Brexit. Yes, with Theresa May struggling to keep her cabinet unified over Brexit, now she has to keep all the parts of the United Kingdom together. The Prime Minister is hosting a special joint ministerial committee in Number 10, involving the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland. Both Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union. Wales, like England, voted to leave. All 3 First Ministers want their nations to continue to participate in the single market. And both Nicola Sturgeon and Carwyn Jones have said their assemblies should be able to vote to approve the government's negotiating strategy. Nicola Sturgeon has also called for Holyrood to have special arrangements with the rest of the EU that could see Scotland remaining within the single market and keeping free movement. Theresa May has rejected these demands, but has instead offered a direct hotline for the 3 leaders to Brexit Secretary David Davis, so they can report any concerns. As well as a forum chaired by Mr Davis, where representatives from the nations can air their concerns before the negotiations to leave the EU begin next year. And we're joined now by the SNP's Europe spokesman, Stephen Gethin. Welcome to the Daily Politics. What's this got to do with Nicola Sturgeon? Isn't this something for the Westminster government to deal with?
Well, of course it isn't. I mean, there is barely an area of devolved competence in Edinburgh, Cardiff or Belfast that isn't impacted by our decisions over our future relationship with the European Union. So it is right that the First Ministers, or the First Minister, come together and discuss this with Theresa May. And I also noticed that the First Minister backed up a letter written by Labour's First Minister in Wales today, calling for an agreed position and a vote in the 4 parliaments on this.
Right. What do you say to those demands? I mean, these seem to be fairly, typical demands you would expect from the SNP. They voted to stay Scotland within the European Union. What's wrong with the demands they're making?
It's the very thing what's happening at the moment is that those who did not like the outcome of the referendum are trying to rerun the referendum, but under a different heading. So let me just finish this. There's certain myths being developed, like, this wasn't a United Kingdom referendum. It was a United Kingdom referendum, the result of which binds the entire United Kingdom, first. Second, demands about the single market to remain in the single market. If you negotiate a leave package, which means that we still have free movement of labour, that we've still got the supremacy of EU law, and that we still don't negotiate the WTO, then you have not left. During the campaign, it was made absolutely clear by those on vote leave that leaving meant you left the single market. David Cameron and George Osborne said, if you vote leave, you've left the single market. And you cannot get away.
This might come across as quite extraordinary.
Let Stephen Gethin respond.
If I can respond.
UK-wide
this is quite extraordinary because in the Conservative Party manifesto, and I think that we should try and implement what we say in our manifestos.
I'm not a Conservative member of Parliament.
It said yes to the single market. No, well, it's difficult to make the difference sometimes, but it said yes to the single market.
But that was, of course, before the referendum.
Well, no, but that was also the part of their manifesto that said that we should have a referendum. Now, you can maintain membership of the single market. You can have different situations for different parts of the United Kingdom. You can have a political willingness. Nobody is denying that it was a UK referendum. That is a matter of fact, Gisela. However, Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain. So, having voted overwhelmingly to remain, I think that the Prime Minister has a responsibility to get to a common agreed position with the different parts of the United Kingdom. And your Labour colleague in Cardiff, Carwyn Jones, agrees with the First Minister on this point as well.
Yeah, OK, well, Stephen Gethin, let's take them one by one. You say you could get an agreement, but you want Scotland to remain a member of the single market. It's very clear Theresa May has said that that's not going to happen.
Well, she hasn't yet.
Well, but everything... Hang on, let's just take it through. She doesn't want the country to be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and she wants to curb... Well, she said she wants to curb freedom of movement. So, to all intents and purposes, she is saying it would be nigh to impossible to remain a member of the single market. What makes you think that Scotland could have a different arrangement with the EU?
Because we see through it, first of all, just to pick up on this, The Leave campaign didn't campaign on whether or not to leave the single market. The Leave campaign campaigned on a blank piece of paper in an act of utterly gross irresponsibility, of which you were a part.
And
on the single market issue, the First Minister is rightly standing up for Scottish business, and actually something that would be good for business throughout the United Kingdom as well. I think about our universities, our food and drink industry, our energy sector, that rely so heavily on freedom of movement and membership of the single market.
Let's take the issue of the single market, because actually it's not true. Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and even Remain campaigners George Osborne and David Cameron said that. In fact, let's listen to what some of them said about leaving the single market.
The British public would be voting, if we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Should we come out the single market?
I think that is almost certainly would be the case, yes.
Do you want us to stay inside the single market, yes or no?
No, we should be outside the single market.
I had Michael Gove in that chair and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European
single
market.
Michael, yeah, absolutely.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
Now, we've played this clip before, but you can see very clearly that they did state on both sides that UK would have to leave the single market if they were leaving the EU. Now, you may disagree with that, but you can't say that they didn't say it.
Well, hold on. If that was still the case of the UK government, why is it? Now, I've asked them, Angus Robertson's asked them, and some of Nick's colleagues and even some of Gisela's colleagues have asked, are we in or out? Do we have membership of the single market? They will not answer that question.
Well,
and as for promises that were made, Michael Gove also told us that Scotland would get power over immigration, and we've been told that we don't seem to be getting that either.
Put that to do you think the government is not absolutely sure about leaving the single market?
Yes, I mean, I think it's right that they have not actually fully ruled it out. And although we tend to look at this in rather a binary way, in or out, the question is the terms on which we might still have preferential access to the single market. And those still are very much up for discussion. And I think that it's in Britain's economic interest, and this is what most businesses are saying, to remain a part of it. So I agree with the SNP about that much. The difficulty of different parts of the UK having different arrangements is it would lead you to the view that you had to have a border between the different parts of the UK, and that would be highly problematic. What I do just want to do is reject what Gisela said, that anybody who is raising these issues is trying to frustrate the result of the referendum, and that is not the case.
Aren't they?
I straight away, within a few hours, and I was leader of the Conservative In campaign, I said that we had to respect the result of the referendum. We are going to leave, but the question is on what terms, and the concern of what I suspect is actually the majority of members of the UK Parliament is that a hard Brexit would be immensely damaging to our economy and would drive a divide between different parts of the UK as well.
Well, then what's wrong with having a vote? What is the government so frightened of? Why not have, and Leave campaigners, why not have a vote so that we could have the will of Parliament being honoured ahead of the negotiations?
Because it's what precisely are you going to put on that paper? As far as I'm concerned, we've had a referendum where people voted to leave. Parliament is now implementing that. And by 2020, I want to be able, by the next general election, I want to have a position where the United Kingdom voters will have the choice to decide what their immigration policy is. They will have a choice of who does their trade negotiations and a choice of where the supremacy of law is.
Because you don't trust Nick Herbert and you don't trust Stephen Gethins to actually honour what the people said.
Otherwise, we have not left. Platform of saying that Parliament should be sovereign, and we should give Parliament a full say over matters, and then say that Parliament can't even discuss these issues.
Oh no, that's not. Who said they're not discussing?
But you can't use a platform of nothing.
Let Stephen Gethins answer, because no one can hear if you all talk over each other.
Sure. Well, look, the Leave campaign campaigned on a blank page, and that was irresponsible. Now, I'm really pleased that the First Ministers have come together to try and get a common agreed position throughout these islands. I think that will do everybody the power of good. And so the First Minister has gone with some ask today about the implementation, about getting an agreed position, and I'm not too sure about this hotline. I can't get any answers out of David Davis in the chamber.
So it's not working.
Sure.
So the hotline's not working.
Well, I'm not. It's not working.
Do you welcome
to me
it? Do you welcome it though? Having this supposedly when it any engagement, right?
Any engagement. It has to be meaningful, though.
Right.
It has to be meaningful.
But isn't that the point? It's not meaningful, is it? Because the demands that are being made by Stephen Gethins and the SNP are not demands that Theresa May will be able to. And Karen Jones, but not Arlene Foster, actually. Just to be clear, there is a difference there, because she has said, and Northern Ireland is saying that they are not that bothered in the way that Nicola Sturgeon and Karen Jones are about membership of the single market.
But they are about freedom of movement
right,
as well.
okay,
I mean,
but not about the single market.
Ireland situation.
We'll come on to the freedom of movement. But this idea of a hotline, I mean, basically, it's just symbolic, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing that's going to happen. They're not going to get anything from ringing up David Davis.
I'm sure they'll have a very nice conversation, but it's a way of saying that the government wants to engage with all parts of the United Kingdom. What I think is important is that the government sets out in broad terms what its ambition is for this Brexit process, and that's what we've been unable to drag out of them so far, and that is the concern, I suspect, in the devolved regions, but also devolved nations, I'm sorry, but also in the UK Parliament, and that's why many of us will be pursuing this issue, and I suspect that there will be a parliamentary majority for saying the government must set out its broad ambition and that there should be a vote on that before the Article 50 process is triggered. And by the way, there's a precedent for that because all major treaties before, that's exactly what the government has done.
All right, but let's come to the demands, because some will say they are unrealistic demands and you're making them in order to justify calling a second independence referendum.
I'm not sure what's unrealistic in there. What we've asked for is there should be a vote in the different devolved administrations and in the Westminster Parliament. That's something we've done in the past.
But they would say that's to reverse the decision.
No, when you have such a significant impact on the devolved responsibilities, that it's right that they should have their say. So we need to get a common agreed position. Theresa May should be doing that, and who knows, she might learn something from the devolved administrations.
So on freedom of movement, you think that's a demand that Theresa May is actually going to look seriously at, to have freedom of movement?
I certainly hope that she does, and we're not alone in making this demand. This is something that's demanded even in her own backbenches. It's something that's demanded in the Welsh Assembly.
But she has already said it wasn't something that people voted for.
This isn't something that we're looking at on our own. People didn't vote for anything in terms of they voted to leave the European Union. It was a blank piece of paper. It was irresponsible, and it's why we're having these discussions right now.
All right, well, I'll let you respond, and then I just need to go back to Stephen Gethins.
When it comes to the single market, which was that you will stop freedom movement of labour, you can't go and say it was a blank sheet of paper. You've just seen the clips, the inners and outers.
Why would they answer us?
And quite frankly, I think it suits the SNP perfectly well to go on almost demanding a right of veto, so you don't have to answer about what's happening to the education system in Scotland, what's happening to the health system in Scotland, what's happening to policing in Scotland, all the other problems you have, which you're not addressing, but you're picking a fight at Westminster level, because it distracts from the other.
Right. Just Stephen Gethins, just on the idea of an independence referendum, when would you call that if you don't have your demands met?
I think what the First Minister said is she's looking at a whole range of options.
What are the other options out of interest?
Well, it could be one that sees, for instance, the UK government is perfectly prepared to try and look at a special arrangement for bankers in the financial sector. So why not have a special arrangement for Scotland and for Northern Ireland? This is something that's been done elsewhere in the European Union.
Do you think Mariano Rajoy will allow that to happen when he is looking at the problems of Catalan?
Well, Spain isn't looking to leave the European Union anytime soon. If the United
But Catalan might want independence.
Well, look, that is an internal matter for the people of Spain. We're looking at a solution.
It's about a realistic demand.
We're looking for a solution that protects Scottish jobs, and that's the First Minister's primary job.
But that wasn't my question. When would you call an independence, a second independence referendum? Because that is one of the things you've said you would do if your demands
We hear a lot from the Conservatives about an independence referendum. The First Minister, like her colleagues elsewhere, is going with a very reasonable set of demands to the Prime Minister today. Now, let's see if she can get a little bit further than we've managed to do in the Chamber in getting some answers. Gisela talks about the single market. We can't even get a straight answer out of the Prime Minister on membership of the single market.
Would you, if there was access or a deal that you recognised would benefit Scotland in terms of access to the single market, would that be enough for you to say, that means we won't call a second independence referendum?
Of course, if you get a deal that protects jobs, keeps membership of the single market, freedom of movement,
membership,
then
access to.
Well, if you get membership of the single market, then that is something that you need to consider.
Right. Would that be possible to have, let's say, some freedom of movement, to have some sort of relaxation on immigration to Scotland? Could you treat a nation like a sector, an economic sector, for example, like banking, or is that just totally unfeasible?
Well, I'm trying to see how you would implement this. How would you enforce that? People have, for example, talked about an immigration policy that you may have regional quotas.
Michael Gove talked about this. Your colleague on the Leave campaign.
I'm a Labour politician, so
He was your colleague for Leave.
Let's just talk about, could you actually control and do this? I don't think it would work. It would work for particular professions. I don't think it would work for geographical regions.
All right.
It can work elsewhere in Australia, for instance, that you talked about during the campaign.
Can I just ask, are you still for membership of the single market, Nick Herbert, or would you be happy with access? Tariff-free or otherwise?
I don't think we should rule anything out, and I don't think the government should be pushed to.
But what would you like? Would you still like to maintain?
What I do think is that the public were saying that they wanted some control over immigration, and so the binary choice that we're offered, which is between membership of the single market where there's full freedom of movement or out, I think that's actually potentially a false position, and that it would be possible for us to negotiate something that gives us preferential access to the single market while maintaining control over our borders.
But not membership.
What the country should be going for would be a kind of membership. And where I would disagree is that I do not think that the British public would accept an arrangement that saw the continuation of free movement. I think that would be problematic. Can I just say that
briefly,
we did say this would happen in the Remain campaign. We said that one of the consequences of a Leave vote, which I respect the fact that that's what the public voted for, would be that there would then be pressure in different parts of the UK, and now that's.
Let me just put that. I mean,
do
you accept that your position is now imperiling the union?
And we have to go to make sure that it doesn't, because well,
it wouldn't have done if Leave hadn't won.
Well, you could argue then the should the Prime Minister have not called a referendum? He had the choice. Referenda always have quite divisive results, not just between the regions, and we've got to make sure the United Kingdom stays together.
Stephen Gethin, thank you.
Thank you.
Theresa May offered the leaders of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland a direct line to her Brexit secretary during talks at Downing Street this morning. It didn't get a warm reception, as Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon declared the lack of information about the government's strategy had been deeply frustrating. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is in Westminster. Gary, what was the mood after the meeting?
I think if you went across the whole range of people there, it ranged from underwhelmed to really quite seriously hacked off. I think the characterisation of this as an emotional meeting is probably a bit wrong. I think everybody kept control on their tempers, but it was not a particularly happy room. Did they learn anything in the room, the leaders of the devolved administrations? They went in with their suspicion that Theresa May is pitching her tent in these negotiations on hard Brexit. That's quite a distance from the EU institutions. Some of them would like it to be much closer to soft Brexit. Theresa May in the room kept insisting that this was a sort of kind of false choice, and she said the same thing in the House of Commons, actually went slightly further later, saying there's no suggestion of hard Brexit. Did they agree anything in the room? I think it was one of those Vera Lynn meetings. They agreed we'll meet again, but not much more than that. Here's how the day here went. They met for 2 hours. Teams from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland demanding answers, seeking assurances. But all they came away with was a commitment to more meetings. People said it got quite feisty in there.
That would be fair.
Ropey? I mean, finger wagging?
I try not to wag fingers. I didn't notice any fingers wagging. Look, there was a very frank exchange of views. We were asking, fairly basic questions about what the UK government was trying to achieve in all of this and not really getting any answers.
Because they haven't got a clue, or they don't want to share the work?
I think probably the former.
Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU, but they've had to wait 122 days since the referendum for this joint meeting.
Well, to be fair, I think there were attempts to set it up before now, but...
Doesn't that discourage you a little about how seriously you're being taken?
When you're trying to get all of us into the same room, because we have Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, we all have different diaries.
Obviously this meeting has been a long time coming, but it has been a 2-hour meeting.
Yeah.
It was a very intensive discussion.
Quite forthright, someone told me.
Well, it was forthright. Why would it not be, and what harm is there in that?
All, including Wales's First Minister Carwyn Jones, agreed they'd learnt pretty much nothing about the UK government position.
Andrew Tyree.
In the Commons, Theresa May came under pressure from one MP in her own party to tell people more about what she wanted from the talks.
Unless the government can provide at least some clarity about its direction of travel soon, many financial and other businesses which have been in touch with me about this will respond to the uncertainty, plan for the worst, and that will be at considerable cost to the UK.
I understand the point my honourable friend's making, but I think he knows full well that if this government were to set out every jot and tittle of our negotiation position, then that would be the best way to get the worst deal for the UK.
Accused of pursuing a hard Brexit policy, the Prime Minister bit back.
The right honourable gentleman seems to think that all of these matters are binary decisions between either you're able to control immigration or you have some sort of decent trade arrangements. That is not the case. We are going to be ambitious for what we obtain for the United Kingdom, and that means a good trade deal as well as control of immigration.
The leaders of the devolved administration said their questions about whether the Prime Minister was heading for hard Brexit or soft Brexit were met with the same phrase: it's not binary.
I think the grey areas are the following, the areas open for negotiation. Will Britain pay some money to the EU budget after it leaves the EU or not? Will it go for very strict immigration controls or rather softer immigration controls? And might it accept the authority of some international court, not the European Court of Justice, but a different court that would be set up with British judges? These are the open questions, and if the British choose to go in one direction on those questions, they'll get relatively more access to the single market than if they go in the other direction.
Nicola Sturgeon will produce her detailed proposals in a few weeks' time. Theresa May promised only to produce high-level negotiating principles for Parliament and the devolved assemblies to debate. Well, those high-level negotiating principles really won't satisfy a lot of MPs who, like Andrew Tyree in that report, are looking for a lot more detail and worried what's going to fill the void. And one Whitehall source was talking about what might be offered to Scotland in terms of a different sort of deal, and talked about opportunities for nuance in terms of how Scotland could get a different sort of deal from England and other parts of the UK. I think Nicola Sturgeon sounds like someone who's looking for a bit more than nuance. I think one thing we learned today perhaps is that even though this was a bit testy as a meeting, testier ones are still to come.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster. Well, earlier I went down to Westminster to speak with the Northern Ireland Secretary James Brokenshire. This is going to be a border with one of the biggest customs unions in the world. Is it going to be a hard border or a soft border?
Well, if you're talking about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, we don't want to see a return to those hard borders. Well, that is a commitment that we've had with the Irish government, indeed with the executive who were represented at the meeting earlier today.
Except we don't know how it'll work.
Well, it's a question of our migration policy and our border policy working together.
I mean, anybody who wants independence in Scotland now knows that you're going to be open to the idea that there could be a soft Scottish border where all sorts of trade can go across after an independent Scotland.
Well, that's not what I've said. The fact is that Northern Ireland shares a land border with the Republic of Ireland. There are unique circumstances.
So will England.
There are unique circumstances.
So will Britain with an independent Scotland if they vote that way. That is a fact.
There are unique circumstances that operate on the island of Ireland that is obviously influencing our approach as we look to those negotiations. But we are leaving as a United Kingdom, and I think that's an important point to stress around all of this, and it is therefore a UK-wide approach informed by the engagement and work of the devolved administration that will help to shape that.
Are you hearing the bursting of enthusiasm for independent Scotland? There is an upswing of interest in talking about it. If Ireland has a soft border with the north, and England has a soft border with Scotland, you suddenly have the ingredients for a breakup of the United Kingdom.
No, I don't see it in that way. I look back at the decision that was taken in Scotland, a clear decision that was taken by the Scottish people, and a clear acceptance by all of the political processes. But there was a recognition there that there was the referendum to come, and therefore that contemplated that it could take two different decisions. What we need to do now is to come together, to work together, to get the best possible outcome for all parts of the United Kingdom in relation to this negotiation. And that as a government is what we're committed to do.
And finally, do we relish the idea of the British border coming back from France into England, and there'll be no question of having any officials on the Calais side of the equation?
No, I think that the benefits to France in relation to the Le Touquet Treaty are very clear. We will be continuing to underline that, and indeed that is recognised by the French government. The discussions we have had with Bernard Cazeneuve, the French Interior Minister.
Mr. Juppé has said, and he's in a strong position possibly to win next year. He has said we're pushing it back. It's going back to Britain. After all, you want to leave Europe. What better way than to take your border back from Calais?
Well, we will see what happens in the months ahead, but what I would say very clearly is the practical benefit that that brings to both countries, how we will be underlining that in future discussions, and actually how that is recognised by the current French government, who see the benefits, see the real issues that emerge, and indeed why those arrangements were put in place in the first place.
James Brokenshire, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John.